Hello and welcome to Carroll County Public Library and A Likely Story Bookstore's To Be Read series. I am Debbie Scheller from A Likely Story Bookstore. Just a reminder that the authors will take questions after the discussion, so be sure to type them into the chat bar. Also, some upcoming events include this Wednesday, August 12th, best-selling author Jennifer Steele will be discussing her new novel, Exile Music. This Thursday is Kids Take Over Day, starting with the Nocturnals author Tracy Hetch at 9 a.m., followed by a full day of fun. And next Tuesday, August 18th, we will be having best-selling author Laura Littman discussing her new book of essays, My Life as a Villainist. Be sure to join us on Facebook Live for all of these events. Tonight, we have authors William Oldfield, who goes by Ham, and Jennifer Bruce. Ham is having some technical difficulties, so he is with us by phone tonight. Their nonfiction book of history is Inspector Oldfield and the Black Hand Society, America's original gangsters and the U.S. Postal detective who brought them to justice. Before the emergence of Prohibition-era gangsters like Al Capone and Lucky Luciano, there was the Black Hand, an early 20th century Sicilian American crime ring that preyed on immigrants from the old country. In those days, the FBI was in its infancy and local law enforcement were clueless against the dangers. Terrorized victims rarely spoke out, and the criminals ruled it with terror until Inspector Frank Oldfield came along. William Oldfield is the great-grandson of U.S. Postal Inspector John Frank Oldfield. His family kept a collection of the original trial evidence from 1910. The family had to keep the entire story a secret for 2 generations for fear of retaliation from the Black Hand or their descendants. Ham is an archivist and a historical lecturer and currently lives in Annapolis, Maryland. Victoria Bruce is a writer, director, media trainer, and publisher. She is the author of 4 nonfiction books, the director of 4 featured documentary films on topics from economics to civil rights to international politics. She lives in Anne Arundel County. And our host and moderator tonight is Ted Zaleski, Director and Management of Budget for Carroll County. He is an avid reader and Carroll County Public Library's first great reader, great leader. Welcome all of you tonight, and thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate it. Ham, why don't you get us started?
Well, thank you very much, Debbie. Vicki and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be hosted by A Likely Story, another independent, awesome bookstore in Sykesville, Carroll County's gem. And thanks to Ted Zaleski over there for being out there for us and being our moderator and helping us with, I'm sure, a ton of fun questions coming our way. As Debbie said, I'm the great-grandson of John Frank Oldfield, who went by Frank, another family nickname, I guess. He was a post office inspector when the post office was actually the main law enforcement arm of the federal government, both domestically and internationally. When the FBI was in its infancy, and you really had some people in the Secret Service and some U.S. Marshals. But since we had postal treaties with countries all over the world, over 190 at the time, part of that treaty was allowed the inspectors to have law enforcement capacity into all those countries. So it gave them international as well as domestic reach. And if they started chasing somebody, they were basically given an unlimited budget, and they could chase them for years until they caught their bad guy that they were after. What happened with this story, Inspector Oldfield and the Black Hand Society, is just one of many cases that Inspector Frank Oldfield was involved in during his very colorful career from politician, sheriff, postal clerk, and post office inspector and private investigator. But this case really puts together his personality and his get-it-done attitude against all bureaucratic obstacles, which we've seen many characters like that, and we're flawed in our lifetimes, especially in law enforcement, where they have to fight a bureaucracy that says that they can't do certain things. And Frank found that obstacle something that he had to overcome, and he used a lot of creativity, media, the press, a lot of internal negotiating, I would say, to go after these early Sicilian mobsters. And Debbie or Vicki, I think, was surprised when I laid 14 years of research and 100 years worth of history in front of her one day. And I'd really love for Vicki to tell that story if she has a moment to do that when she introduces herself. So I'd like to, without further ado, I'd like her to get started as well.
Thank you, Hammy. You know, every time we do a book event, I marvel at the fact that I got to work on this book with William Oldfield, and that he entrusted me to tell his family story, because you don't come around to a story like this very often, where I can really tell you, you know, before you read this book, you probably didn't know that the first organized Sicilian mafia, organized crime bust that landed in a federal court conviction was done by a U.S. Post Office inspector. And I think it's, you know, very appropriate now that we called up all of these important stories of the post office as, you know, our government's trying to shut it down, or our executive branch, because I didn't know anything about post office inspectors. So the fact that, you know, this guy I just met tells me he has 2,000 documents about the first Sicilian mafia bust, and it was done by a post office inspector, was just phenomenal. So again, Hammy, thank you. I miss working with you and seeing you more often. This is fun, though, to talk about this story. So thanks.
Yes, we have to collaborate again, Vicki,
yeah.
very soon.
Next story. So anyway, I have the book here, Hammy, and I'm just showing I just showed a picture of Frank, and I can show pictures as we talk about the story throughout.
Well, yes, we might as well promote the fact that there's about 69 wonderful plates, picture plates in the book itself, which is rare nowadays in books. Thank goodness for Simon & Schuster and Touchstone Books and Atria Books to say, wait a minute, we really need these example pictures, because the pictures, of course, don't tell the entire story. But we were very lucky as a family that my great-grandmother, Margaret Galena Oldfield, John Frank's wife, and not in a sense of a pack rat, but I think very proud of what her husband was doing. And she basically collected newspaper articles that were being mailed to her by other postal inspectors from all over the United States, and some from overseas. And so it really cataloged the entire career of John Frank Oldfield, not just this particular case. And when John Frank Oldfield went to trial in 1910 in January, he brought, for impressive purposes as well, 7 steamer trunks full of evidence into the courtroom in Toledo, Ohio, into the federal courtroom. And we were lucky enough that approximately 1 steamer trunk survived over 100 years of sitting in basements, wet basements, floods, all sorts of things. And so hopefully Vicki has a chance to throw a few of those pictures up there. That unfortunately, since I'm not on video, I can't show you some of the originals.
Okay, ready to go?
Yeah, please, Ted.
Okay, now, first, that initial meeting between the two of you, I've seen some other accounts of it, and it was even more interesting than you described. So you're sitting in a coffee shop in Annapolis, and this guy comes up to you with what is either a really unusual pickup line or a kind of nutty story. Just kind of let people know what your reaction was back then.
Well, Ted, I have to say, as a writer and a filmmaker, I never met a story I didn't want to listen to. So it always hooks me a little bit when somebody says, you have to write this book. And most of the time I listen to them because I like stories, but then I say, yeah, you should write that book. You know, it's their story, it's their family. And so when Hammy, this guy comes up to me and he's sort of like hovering, and I'm like, oh God, I'm busy, but I'm sure he's got a story. He says, what do you do? I'm a writer. Oh, I got this book you should write. All right. He starts talking about this story. And now I'm trying to be cool, right? I'm like, wow, but at the same time, I want to put like a LoJack on him and make sure that like he can't get away, and that I get to write this story, because I was so blown away by, you know, this guy. Is he legit? He's got the story of the first mafia bust. It's his great grandfather. There's all these archival materials. It's every author's dream. And so I played it cool, but I got his number. And then I said, okay, let me call you when I'm finished with this book I'm working on. I was almost done. And I did, and he was nowhere to be found.
I bailed because, honestly, Ted, the truth was is that we had been pummeled by, you know, verbally by our family for a century, each generation, to make sure that we hold on to these materials and make sure we understand the story and the history, but we absolutely could not tell anyone. And the reason being is because, unfortunately, in the Cleveland, Akron, Youngstown, and Pittsburgh area, as you probably just saw recently with the Irishman, that, you know, Cleveland was the bombing capital of America in 1977, 87 mafia bombings, blowing people's houses up. And many of the families that my great-grandfather had put their family members into federal prison doing hard labor, basically, at Sing Sing and at Fort Leavenworth, their descendants were going to school with me. And some of their parents were actually were going to League of Women Voters meetings with my mother. And so we had to be extremely careful because many of them didn't know who we were. And if they had found out, we weren't really sure what would happen on the retaliation side, because there was quite a lot of that going on up there.
You know, that idea of retaliation, which concerned your family for decades, more recently, it's, at least in part, morphed into a concern about embarrassing people, though, too, right?
You know, that's funny that you say that, because some of the families, I'll just be honest, there's some of the materials I have actually, you know, mention families that are quite prominent today. And so I haven't dwelled on those as much, you know. Now, we did have one family that did come forward, the Butera family, which was one of our prime bad guys, his wife's family, the Buteras, and they came forward and have been quite engaging because it helped them discover a piece of their family history that had been buried. And basically, they weren't talking about it on their side of the family, and they were the bad guys because they had, of course, become quite prominent veterinarians, successful doctors, successful corporate counsels for major U.S. corporations. You know, they've done very well for themselves. And so, you know, that was the other side of it, is my parents thought, are we going to be embarrassing some of these families as well?
Well, I have to interrupt you, Hammy, because that very family, the veterinarian, right, she was super helpful. She's the one who found the story, and she found, you know, looking for her great-grandfather, doing genealogy, and finds it in Leavenworth. What? My great-grandfather?
Yep.
Then starts to unfurl this mystery. But at the same time, her very prominent brother and sister really want nothing to do with it at all.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, you're correct. Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
a lot of families are like this. And even her father, so it was his mother, was the daughter of one of the main guys. He didn't want to know about it at all at first. Now he loves it. His name's Sal Butera, so I'll give him a shout out because he's really great. And, you know, he... You
know, and relatives from the other side of the story, a couple of years ago, the two of you had dinner with the great-granddaughter of one of the main characters.
Yes, that's her.
That's who we're talking
that's
about.
the same
That's
person.
Melanie Butera, actually, Ted. Yes, that's her. And Sal Butera. And the interesting thing, we had dinner with them in Canton, Ohio, where there's, even to this day, there's still a strong Sicilian mafia organization. But Sal, actually, we were in an Italian restaurant, of course, and Sal was joking at the dinner table that right around the corner in the restaurant was the Italian Society, was meeting, and all the guys were there. And he said, "Why? You know, we could introduce you to all of them." So I thought, you know, that's okay, Sal. Probably not a good idea right now. There might be somebody that doesn't like it too much.
Right. Okay, so I've spent some time with your book here,
Aw.
and I've got
Thank you.
way more questions than we're going to have time to deal with. So I have to try and find the ones I most want to get out there. But
Well, let Vicki shorten my answers. How's that? She's good at helping me with that.
Yeah, as I was reading this, I was struck by a number of kind of personal connections I had to this book. First, Ellicott City is a place I've visited many times over the years, and my daughter actually lived on Main Street for a year. And then
Hello?
I think Ted must have.
everywhere I was going in this book, things just kept coming up that say, well, yeah, I know that. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, you were just there was a little hiccup in the audio.
Okay. Okay, so your subtitle is kind of a spoiler. So unless you tell me otherwise, I'm not going to worry about spoiling the story. Frank Oldfield is successful in bringing the criminals down. And reading this book, I would say, is not about finding out what happened. It's not like solving the mystery. The interesting part here is reading about how it all happened. How did Oldfield do this?
Against all odds, we must say, definitely. He basically had so many people against him because remember, as a investigator, number one, he already was a political appointee. Back then, they were political appointees initially. Then they had to be cleared, as they clear people today. And because of that, there's always basically 50% of the people you work with are on the other side. If you want to look at it that way. And so sometimes they're there to help you, and sometimes they're there not to help you, depending on personal biases. And then, of course, there's always a massive bureaucracy. Well, he's coming out telling basically, the most powerful law enforcement organization in the world at the time, they're top level people who have much more experience than he does, many more years in the service than he does, that, well, I've discovered the fact that there is organized crime in the United States, and it is franchised all across the country. They all know each other. They all communicate with each other. They share money with one another. They have a hierarchy of senior level executives all the way down to the lowest level soldiers, and basically they looked at him and said, "You're crazy." They're just local Italian immigrant gangs localized throughout the United States, working autonomously in their own little towns. They have nothing to do with each other. And that's basically how the investigation started. And plus he, at the time, also knew nothing about them. He was also speculating on this, but he started putting the pieces together.
On that idea that law enforcement didn't believe that there was organized crime, even Oldfield's boss, Abraham Holmes, said, no, it doesn't exist. Now, he did change his mind later, but he even at one point talked about Oldfield as being on an expensive wild goose chase. And that goes back, you were talking earlier about the unlimited spending. Oldfield was spending a lot of money, and Holmes wasn't very happy about that. Can you talk about their relationship a little bit?
Vicki, I think Vicki did a great job. I had what research I had done from the 14 years. She was able to dig up some interesting. I don't know where you found some of it, Vicki, if you wouldn't mind. I mean, you found some really interesting information about the two of them.
Well, there were, this was my first fully historical work of nonfiction. I had never done this kind of research before, and I had never had the challenge of teasing out someone's character just with, a few letters. And so Abraham Holmes, he was, sort of hiding from me for a while, but I don't know exactly where I found what I found. But I do remember, so there were some things Hammy would tell me that were like his family lore. And then there was the truth, and sometimes it lined up and sometimes it didn't, right? So, in Hammy's family lore, it was, that his boss was out to get him. This is why he got fired. And then I ended up finding the evidence of this, all the way to the bitter end where, he's, just Frank was probably difficult to have as your subordinate, right? So he just didn't like rules, and he probably spent money he shouldn't have, but he, nothing, he really was, there was a lot of competition among the inspectors. And I think Holmes, because of the things we found out about him, he was very probably envious. And another part of it was that everybody in the post office inspection service, they called themselves the silent service, and because they were known, unlike the FBI today, and the FBI was not even around then, it was just starting, they were not publicity hounds. And then Frank came along and he started getting all this press, and people loved him, and he was sort of a celebrity. So that really angered Abraham Holmes, who remained his boss until he quit.
And Frank not only
all the way to Oldfield had an ally, and that always, and it's funny if you notice every flawed character plus every hero, if you want to call it that, if you look at every hero story out there, it seems like they always have a challenge of some type, and it's usually internal. And I have a feeling that just from my family lore and what Vicky was able to come up with was I agree with you. He absolutely had to have been a difficult person because he was singularly focused. He didn't really care how much it cost. He sort of had a high moral, I think, almost an overly moral standing, mentally about that. I have to do this. It has to be done. And so I don't care what it costs. And what was interesting is that he had an ally in U.S. Attorney William Day, or Assistant U.S. Attorney William Day. And it's funny because I'll show you how long this story goes. I'm at Ohio State University in 1981, and I meet Bob Day. And you heard the last name. Bob Day was our alumni advisor to my fraternity at Ohio State that I was a member of. And he came up, and my dad and mother came down to visit. And Bob Day, of course, as an alumni advisor, was there to meet all the parents. And he went over, and he and my dad walked outside to smoke cigarettes, and they were gone for half an hour talking, and then they came back in. And I find out that Bob Day was the grandson of William Day. And it shows you how small the world is. And Bob knew exactly who I was when I was in the fraternity, but he never told me. He told my father first, and I learned second. So it shows you how the alliances obviously went on even longer. At least they recognized the fact that I was the great-grandson of the person. But Day was his ally, and actually wrote letters to Abraham Holmes saying, I support what expenses John Frank is spending. He's on the right path, that kind of thing. So I think that may have helped buffer it a little bit with Abraham Holmes, who was very, very disciplined, actually, and much more mature about his management style than John Frank was.
And on that, and Victoria, you said that Frank wasn't big on rules. Let's say he ran into rules and forms and supervision and wasn't very happy about any of that.
I mean, I love the way that Frank handles stuff. I mean, for a character to write about this, I mean, I'm not sure I'd want him as my dad, but oh my God, is he funny. Can I read a little bit, just a real short passage? So when this was another story that Hammy had told me before I actually found the article about it. And I'm like, that can't be true. You're exaggerating. So the story was that Frank had, the post office inspectors actually, they investigate internally in the post office, right? So there's a big scandal going on that involved a U.S. congressman, and they were selling like thousands of these really crappy typewriters that they know didn't even work, and cash machines, and spending millions and millions of dollars to federal contracts for these post offices to their friends. So he's investigating that. So he ends up going after this guy, and this is how he went. He was the state's attorney in New York?
He was the district attorney of the city of New York. Yeah.
Right. He goes
and his brother was a postmaster.
And he's stalking him. Like, Frank is stalking this guy, and he's gonna get him no matter what. And he took an office, and he starts investigating him, and the guy tries to throw him out of the office. So Frank is down in the lobby of the big post office building, which is still there in Lower Manhattan, and he's waiting for this guy to go to lunch. And this is the excerpt from the New York Times reporting on this incident. Men and women who happened into the East Corridor of the post office at 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon were surprised to see a rather small-sized man with black hair and a mustache, and another rather small-sized man with red hair and a mustache rolling about over the marble floor in angry embrace. Over the withering antagonist towered a tall, distinguished-looking man with gray hair and a mustache who waved his cane authoritatively and called upon the contestants to let go. Half a dozen watchmen and other officials of the federal building were soon on the scene and pulled the fighters apart by main strength. Then it was learned that he of the red hair was Assistant United States District Attorney Ernst E. Baldwin, and his antagonist was Post Office Inspector J. Oldfield of Cincinnati. The tall man who had stood over them was United States District Attorney Burnett. That was Frank's style. So these stories that got passed down from generation to generation indeed were true in many cases. And I thought that was hysterical. I mean, he just really went after it to beat the guy up.
You mentioned the sometimes gap between family lore and what actually happened. One really interesting story, I think, was somebody that Frank knew was arrested for murder, and he was concerned about a lynching and was trying to prevent it. And the family lore was kind of an Atticus Finch story, but the real story wasn't quite the same.
Yeah, that was
well. No, Vicky had found something that was very painful for all of us. Actually, Just America was an African American man who had at the bottom of Main Street, all the way down the bottom by the bridge on the left, is a gray stone building in Ellicott City. That was the store, the general store where he worked. Now, unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the owner, but he had worked for him for years.
Stories. It wasn't Joseph America, but
oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
right. That was another story that later on. But go ahead. Just don't want to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But City, we're going like right down home, Carroll and Howard County.
Exactly. So it was an African American who had killed who had worked for the store owner and had killed him. And unfortunately, there was, of course, since it was such a local event, such a small town, it was a lot of uproar, of course. And so John Frank at the time and his brother Clarence were doing their very best. His brother Clarence was involved in more of the customs type office, that sort of thing. And John Frank was a sheriff at the time of Howard County before he was a post office inspector and a clerk before that. And he and Clarence tried to protect the man from being lynched, but were eventually unsuccessful in doing so.
But the family, when Hammy first told me that story, it was he saved them. This guy was saved because of the work.
Exactly. It was very disappointing for us. We thought that his life had been saved. So.
Yeah, I could see that. After all those years, it'd have to be a little disconcerting to find out that the story wasn't quite what you thought.
I'll tell you, to be honest with you, it's amazing how many stories we got close to correct. And if you understand how, you look at 4 generations, it's amazing how things are twisted and turned. And in fact, most of the stuff was twisted and turned. And if it hadn't been for all the archival materials that were kept and the scrapbooks, that sort of thing, I think I would have even had trouble understanding what I'd been told, except for the fact on the Black Hand case, of course, that was the one we were told never to let anybody know about.
Right. And of course, what you're saying is probably true of just about every family, except they don't have documentation to go back to, so the stories continue.
Yes, I have to admit, we're very lucky.
We've revealed some aspects of Frank's character, and I think you could also call him a character. But there was another aspect of him that was pretty interesting. He was very concerned with his appearance. And there's a place in the book where you say he was obsessive about his hygiene and he took great care of his appearance. He brushed his teeth zealously, went to the barber weekly, and dressed as if he worked on Wall Street with the finest suits from a Baltimore haberdashery. And throughout the whole story, this remains Frank, except I think there's one point near the end of the trial where he's so tired that you say, you know, the one time he didn't make sure he looked good. But it was a big deal for him.
It was. And it also, I think it was funny because when he first wanted to sort of get into investigate the Italian community, you know, he looked like he looked, right? He looks like a banker, you know, a very pale, waspy looking banker, very skinny with his derby hat. And he always looked like that, you know? So it was like, he was like, why is nobody talking to me? You know? And, you know, it's the same thing now. Like if somebody went into any community where there's gang activity, doesn't speak the language and looks like a cop, you know, but he didn't, although he was a very good investigator, he was not an undercover guy, you know, in that way. That was DeMaio, who's another great character in this book as well, another Italian who was a wonderful undercover operative.
You know, on that idea that people didn't want to talk to Frank, that was a much bigger problem in that the Italian community and the people who were being preyed upon by the gangsters wouldn't talk to the police. Now, to be fair, for the most part, the police weren't in a position to talk to them either because they didn't know how to speak Italian. But even if they did, these people were basically saying, we're not talking to you. No good can come of me talking to you about what just happened. Can one or both of you talk a little bit about what was behind that and the problems that caused?
Go ahead, Hammy.
Sure. Well, what Frank came across was, of course, that problem is consistent today, as you know, especially in anti-terrorism investigations, where human intelligence is absolutely the most important component. Signals intelligence is wonderful, you know, like the NSA, that sort of thing. But when it comes down to it, human intelligence is still the best, just like Vicki was saying about infiltrating a gang or getting involved in the community, knowing the lingo, the language, that sort of thing. So what Frank did initially is he had to find, and I think this is really something that was ahead of his time. I think some of the law enforcement techniques that are used today, we just consider normal. They weren't normal back then. So I think the Post Office Inspection Service overall, and Frank individually, I think were very creative. He was able to work with some police officers that were Italian in the Columbus, Ohio area, and also started putting a little bit of pressure, well, let's just use that term politely, on some of the victim families to get them to translate some of these extortion letters and documents that they were receiving, to see exactly what they say, because not only were they in Italian and also more of a Sicilian dialect of Italian, which you even have spelling differences back in 100 years ago. They were also, in a sense, in a code, especially the internal communications between gang members, whenever they were able to seize those. And so it took him, you know, some cajoling, I would say, some arm twisting, maybe even more than that. But Vicki, I think, was quite just as surprised as I was as to how many, if you look at through the scrapbooks that we have, of the depositions from the victims, especially the Fasone family and many other families. And you read all through these original depositions that we've been lucky enough to keep, and see it, you know, how much they were willing to say once they were put under the right protection or the right conditions. And I think there also was some infiltration. We've never known exactly who those people were. I don't think we ever will.
Yeah, in a second, I want to talk about kind of the Black Hand business model, but you mentioned the letters that went to people, and the letters are really interesting, the language that they use. I know, Victoria, you've got a copy of the book there. On page 89, there's a translation of one letter. Could you read that?
Sure. Oh,
Sergeant
yeah.
silently.
They were somewhat eloquent sometimes too, depending on who the author is. So this went to a gentleman friend. A lot of times they'd say, dear friend, we have silently removed emperors, kings, and princes and have been as fearless of apprehension as if we were the wind sighing in the trees. At night, we revel in bloodshed. We smile at tears and pleadings, and our field of operation is bounded only by the universe. We scoff at the police. We push them aside as we would a child.
Yes, this is a pretty interesting letter. And you know, think about the fearless as apprehension, as if we were the wind sighing through the trees. A little bit poetic, even.
Right?
That was Salvatore Lima. Yeah.
Yeah, and in some of these letters, they'll talk about cutting out your heart, dying like a dog. Pretty colorful stuff. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, we understand the concept. The word blackmail. Now you know where that comes from Black Hand letters coming to people. So you see, some fun things have happened because something that's interesting. A great letter that they even use on the back of the book. Funny enough, for the picture back there. When people get a chance to peek at the book. The hard copy, at least. It was a letter to Gaetano Di Camilli, who lived on 89th Street in Cleveland. And he lived behind his saloon. So funny enough, the letter was addressed to Gaetano Di Camilli, 89th Street-Saloon, which I always thought was interesting. And then it says City, Cleveland on there. But the letter to him has the skull and crossbones, whatnot. The letter's written in human blood. And which turns an interesting brown over 100 years. And I'm holding the letter, and I'll make the sound. How's that? You hear it? Okay. I'm holding the letter in my hand, but it says, Di Camilli, from one of our secret spies, we have learned that you have informed the police, contrary to our warnings. Therefore, it is time to die. And on the first occasion, you will find a bullet in your stomach, coward. You have willed it, and you will die like a dog, the terrible Black Hand.
Not nice people.
Yeah.
Understatement.
Some of the important events of the book take place in what was called the Italian Village in Columbus, which I read about, and apparently now is a popular eating and drinking district. Now, you mentioned a lot of addresses, and there are photos of buildings in that area. I guess you guys probably visited there and tried to see some of these places?
So I did not go to Columbus while I was making this, but what I would do while I was writing with Hammy, and of course I would call him and ask him to describe things that he remembered. And what I used really to help tell this story, and I have to say, Hammy did 13 years of research. So I had not only all of his research, and then it was just my job to put the puzzle pieces together. And what was a miraculous tool was Google Maps, Google Images. So when I'm describing, I was able to plot out, and I still have it because you can save your own map in Google. And, I thought this would be a great addition if the publisher would want me to do this, and we never finished it. But how cool would a book be that would have a map, a Google map that could take you to all the places and all the homes? So I could say, Joe Lima walks 6 blocks south, and I can see where everybody is. And that was how, the day that he took down, the 3 days or so that he took down all of these different things and places, I had to have some way to visualize that because it was so complicated. And so I really did it through Google Images, Google Maps. When I did go, we got to go to the beautiful building that was the Federal House building, which was Frank's office. And it's a beautiful law firm, and they've preserved it. Gorgeous.
On your Google Maps site. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to interject for a moment that when it was quite entertaining to be the chauffeur, because I lived in Columbus for a decade. So I knew every back street, every alley, whatnot. And I even had worked, by the way, for Bob Day for a short period of time at 33 North 3rd Street. But after I was in the fraternity. And so there was still a connection going on. And he showed me a lot of things about the case because we would walk at lunch. And he showed me where a number of things are no longer. They were there when I was still in college or out of college, but then they were torn down afterwards, like on Naughton Street, where there's a number of things you see, or some of our lead characters. Those places are pretty much, all those things have been torn down and new buildings built, that sort of thing with new modern development, you know. And Italian Village was just being, you could buy a house in Italian Village for $1,500 back then, and now you have to pay $1.5 million for it. So it still looked a lot like it did in 1909, and when I was there in the 1980s. And there was a huge resurgence in Columbus to buy all these places, to restore them and regentrify and really clean, you know, these areas up. It used to be once majestic homes, and now they are again beautiful Victorian era homes. But to take Vicki to drive around like the chauffeur was so much fun because she was just so she had pictured everything in her mind, and then to see it in person and just to see her face, and it was wonderful about how she reacted to it all and seeing it come to life, and you could tell how much she had committed into the creation of the story in the book.
Yeah, that reminds me, my wife and I actually drove down to Ellicott City yesterday or the day before. I wanted to see if Frank's house was still on Main Street. We were not able to recognize it.
It burned down in 1969.
Okay. Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, the house next door is still there on both sides, and a new house in the middle is, you know, which doesn't look new compared to the other houses because they're all built in that historical appearance because of the historical society there. But that house burned down in 1969, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you see the jail, Ted?
Oh yeah. Like I've been to Ellicott City. I don't know.
That's quite a building, and so that's where the lynching happened. That scene.
Oh,
so
okay.
I did go there before I wrote that, and I really felt that presence. It's a dark area on that hill.
I didn't even think about that. I'm glad you brought that up. Next time I go, I will.
I'm hoping to grab a drone, Ted and Vicki. I'm telling Vicki right now, I haven't told her before, and both of us go together, and we actually walk through Ellicott City to a couple of these places, and we do a person on the scene type YouTube videos, a couple short ones, maybe 30 seconds or a minute at a time, little snippets of history for fun, because some of these places are just so colorful that no matter how well they're described on paper, it really benefits people to get to see them from either above and see how they, where they're positioned, especially that jail. That jail really is something, how it's sort of hidden in a rock outcropping below the courthouse in Ellicott City. It almost looks like it's a dungeon.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And back on Victoria's idea about the Google Maps thing. Yeah, I'm a big map guy, so I kind of like the idea anyway. But I think that'd be a wonderful thing to have in a book like this. Okay, mentioned earlier that I wanted to kind of talk about the business model for the Black Hand, and Sam Lima, the big guy in this whole operation, kind of thought of himself as a CEO and a big businessman, and just looked at this as a business like any other business. And he's even quoted at one point, John Amicon, the potential victim who ends up being part of bringing him down. He's talking about him not paying and says, how dare he disrespect us? We're trying to shake him down and he's disrespecting us by not giving us his money. And you have to love the idea of this business model. I mean, it's almost a pure profit business. They spend a little bit of money, but pretty much it's all revenue and gets divided up among a number of people. But the more money is coming in, the better everybody is doing. Can you guys talk about that a little bit?
Go ahead, Vicki.
Yeah, so I think what was really interesting to me is, like, a lot of us thought that the mafia starts around Al Capone, 30s, 40s. And, you know, they had all this money and they lived a lavish lifestyle. What's different in this proto mafia, the Black Hand in 1909 and even before, and the book really goes into the history, which the Sicilians started in New Orleans post Civil War. But so by 1909, they're making good money, but they don't live these lavish lifestyles. I think this was like just on the verge of that. And Sam Lima actually gets out, you know, spoiler alert, you know, he's going to get caught, right? So when he gets out, he goes to California and he ends up, you know, becoming a mafioso in like the more modern type that we know. But I felt like these guys kind of did have businesses. All of their money was sent back home. And what Melanie Butera, who's the great-granddaughter,
She's great-granddaughter, just like I am.
Of one of these mafiosos. I mean, we have the cashier's checks of them sending money over and over, $900 in a day, you know, 1909. You know, she said that this was in their DNA. You didn't get to say, no, I'm not going to be a mafioso. If you're from Sicily, that's pretty much going to be your job. And when they came to the US, they continued this lawlessness, really. They just operated, you know, on the fringe in a different way, but it was very much, you know, organized. There were bylaws of the society. There was CEO, there were books that were kept. There were the list of names of who were going to embezzle from and threaten, how much they were worth. And they, you know, you don't ever see Lima in a big fancy house. He's still wearing his, you know, work clothes and working with a fruit store as a front.
You know, putting aside how they're getting their money, I guess you can kind of say in sending all that money back home to Italy, you know, for those people, they're doing a good thing.
Right.
You know, they're being good children.
Industrious.
This was a real Robin Hood story. A lot of the people in the mafia or the Black Hand, the earlier Black Hand, remember we had 2 million immigrants come to the United States in a very short period of time, about 20 years. And about 48% of all the wealth of the entire nation, actually new nation, if you want to call it that. Italy, remember, was a bunch of city-states until 1890. So about 48% of the familial wealth, you know, middle class and whatever, and some of the upper class came to the United States, as well as Brazil and Central and South America. Quite a few went to Brazil as well. The United States wasn't their only stopping point. And so what happened was that the Ndrangheta, the Camorra, the Sicilian Black Hand, any of the organized crime groups in different parts of Naples, you know, or Sicily and mainly southern Italy, had to follow those families and that money because that was their livelihood. I mean, yes, as Vicki said, they had fruit carts, fruit stores, cigar rolling factories. They had small, medium-sized businesses, but that really wasn't supporting their overall, you know, requirements. And so it was kind of a Robin Hood story. The families back in Italy, in Sicily, you know, there's some families will speculate that they didn't know, that they just thought that their son had done well in the new country, United States, and was sending money back home. You know, but I don't know if it's hard for me to believe that they didn't know that what their sons were involved in, because the part of the mafia or the Black Hand that people had trouble understanding is that because of their sophistication and the way they were making their money, they didn't have to be as violent as some of the other gangs are, but there was a period of time where bombing was basically equated, you know, just like in the Cleveland era in the 70s I mentioned earlier, where Cleveland had, you know, 87 bombings in 1977, just in 1 year, of mafia guys killing each other. The Black Hand was known for the bombing, and that was sort of the dynamite sort of thing. And that was a common thing, is to put dynamite wrapped up in newspaper on someone's front porch and blow off their front porch if they didn't pay. And that generally got them to pay. It seemed to work quite effectively.
Yeah, I guess so. And Sam Lima, was pretty sure he was smarter than the police, and that whatever they could do, he would figure out how to take care of himself. But there's one scene in the book that I really liked. Frank and some of his colleagues, frustrated that they haven't been able to get any hard information or cooperation, decide to set up a camera in front of Sam Lima's place. And Sam not only doesn't hide, but he gathers up his family and poses for a picture.
Yeah.
I think Vicki, if you would mind talking about that, because I think you really enjoyed that.
I don't know where that picture is in the book, but yeah, that was what it was, right? The Italian criminals never had any fear of law enforcement at all. They could easily buy off the local cops. They knew that none of their victims would ever, here's the picture. They knew that none of their victims were ever going to speak to the police at all. And in Lima, this tiny little city in a tiny little town, they were just well loved, just like Pablo Escobar was well loved in his town. He made, they were basically the guys who had their names on the back of the Little League jerseys. I mean, the bankers loved them then. And so they didn't do, like, right in the little Lima, they didn't have victims. They went outside to Columbus and Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, actually all over the country. So they just didn't take it seriously when they first saw Frank coming after them. And then
I think you're right. I think they actually thought that the police were, let me just use the word, imbeciles, that were not at the same level of intelligence, sophistication, education. They didn't see them as, they really saw themselves as elite, superior, above the law, and that their code of conduct, omerta, if you want to say it, and their rules and regulations and how they ran themselves and how they operated were like the robber barons, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Boltons, the Vanderbilts. They saw themselves at that level when they came to the United States. In fact, they came to the United States because they said, well, this country, I can do anything I want. This is the land of the free, and where the small guy can become a Rockefeller if he wants to. And I think they really believed that. And then well, interestingly enough, if you look at some of the letters, I have actually a couple hundred, some of them are complete, some are half or partially complete, communications between the actual gang members. And in the code writing, they call the law enforcement of any kind, they call them buzzards. They use different code words for different types of people and activities. Like money is usually involved with bananas. We're going to divide up the banana shipment. That would be dividing up money amongst the different members, that kind of thing. Now, something that Vicki always loved, and I don't know if she has it, I'm guessing on the page number, Vicki, if you wouldn't mind reading it, because I love how you read it. It's probably 164, maybe 165. It's some of the examples of the bylaws and the articles. It shows how organized the mafia was at the time, or they had actually had a constitution with articles in it.
They actually
As
did.
part of their organization.
I'll read just the first and the last one, or maybe the first and the second. This is
some are kind of comical. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. They came up with these laws the night that actually Frank was on a stakeout. This was a meeting of all these mafiosos, and
where the camera was. Yeah.
We have the bylaws of the first mafia, like big time convention. It says bylaws and regulations of the Society of the Bananas. That was their internal name, they called themselves. It says Article 1, the person who tries to reveal the secrets of this society will be punished with death. Article 2, a member who offends one of his companions, staining his honor, will be punished according to Article 1. Goes on, and stabbings, maimings, and then Article 16 is my favorite. It says, there can be no excuse for failures or penalties in conformity with the articles. However, there may be extenuating circumstances in the case of drunkenness. So
pre-prohibition, right?
Yeah.
Nice to know that they give you a little flexibility. Debbie, I can keep going for a while. You need to let me know when we need to go to question and answers. But yeah, I wanted to talk about Frank's father.
Ted, why don't we just talk about his father and then we can go to questions.
Okay. All right. I have 138 cards I need to throw away now. Not really. Okay, so Frank's
Well,
father.
thank you, by the way, that you found it
first,
so interesting, Ted.
Oh, thank you. When Frank was younger, and even as he was older, he competed with his brothers for his father's attention. His father played a big role in a number of moments in Frank's life. He got him out of a lot of jams. He got him jobs. The postal inspector job, which became, Frank's path to success, his father was very directly responsible for, and maybe even did something illegal in the Postal Service records where Frank's record of removed was turned into reinstated, which landed him in Columbus. And then later in life, Frank is wondering, was his father proud of him? So can you guys talk about some of that, the relationship and the Frank's father played?
Yes, Vicki, can I hear your impression of that? I'd love to hear it first, if you don't mind.
Well, I was thinking that this was a you question because this is, I think this
Oh,
is.
I can answer it, yes, but I just want to, because
there's a lot of heart in the stories that you told me about the situation. And I think, even your own family, and we had a lot of deep conversations about this, wanting to please your parents. Gosh, don't we all have that neuroses?
That's exactly where I was coming from, Vicki, with this, is that has not, Ted, that's a great question. And I think that every young man and every young woman, goes through this in life. Did we do the right thing? Did we do, please our father or mother? Did we equal them, or did we surpass them, or did we at least please them with our activities? And I think that with 8 brothers and sisters, interestingly enough, John Frank was not the oldest, but he ended up having to do most of the family responsibility stuff. His older brother William took off and went down to New Orleans. His youngest brother, Ulysses S. Grant Oldfield, the youngest, was we used to call him Crazy Uncle Grant, was sort of the playboy who was allowed to do whatever he wanted. And his brother Clarence, actually, though, was very responsible. And so were his sisters, actually. But Inspector Oldfield, Frank Oldfield, his father's name was Hamilton, by the way, Benjamin Hamilton Oldfield. He went by Hamilton, or Hammy as well, and you can see where my name came from. Was one of the early members and founders of the Republican Party. And so there was a lot of politics going on back then in Howard County. And John Frank, like I said, was a political appointee into the Postal Service. And his father, Hamilton, was the postmaster of Ellicott City. He was able to get which was like a franchise back then, it was sort of a political award for doing good work politically, in some way. And so I think that he probably did well with his father, Hamilton. In 1910, Hamilton does come to Athens, Ohio, which is where Ohio University is now, was where they lived. And he was based out of Cincinnati and Columbus. But Hamilton does come to see the family. He does stay in touch with all his 4 grandsons on a regular basis. In fact, heavily favors them. Some of them actually spend time going to school in Ellicott City, even though the rest of the family lives in Ohio after John Frank got transferred. So I think that before John Frank passed away, I think that he had a reconciliation. I think that he felt that he'd done a pretty good job, and after receiving so many favors through his father's influence.
Well, we're going to go to questions now, if that's good with you, Ted.
Of course.
Okay.
Oh, it is 7:30 or close to 7:30, Debbie. Are we able to answer a few questions? Would that be all right?
Yep. We're going to go to questions right now, if that's good with you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so we've had a couple people say that they are really sorry you weren't able to be part of the Authors Mondays at Maggie series. So hopefully another time when we all get back together. Speaking of your family and your father, Hammy, how did your family feel about all these secrets coming out in the book? Did you have to get permission, or how did it come about that you decided to write this book?
I think it really came out to be, we were told as early teenagers, say seventh grade or so, is when this was all really truly revealed to us. We'd heard other conversations amongst the family, and then during family get-togethers, Thanksgivings and Christmases, when all the relatives would get together and they'd all be talking. But when it really came down to it, it was the law. I mean, we weren't afraid of getting spanked or something or beaten for it, but we were definitely afraid of the admonition, do not say anything about it. This is a secret. And so what came down to it, when my father died in 1989, he made sure that I knew where all these artifacts were, and that my mother basically inherited them from him. And when she fell ill, and in 2002, she and I talked about it before she passed, and she said, that probably would be a good idea, because remember, she is not directly related to it, but she was very, very much in support of my father's history and that sort of thing, and wanted us to know about it. She admonished me. It was very clear that, maybe I should just move on. Maybe I should take all of it, take it out into someplace, where I can, and openly burn it, all the records. And destroy all of them and move on with your life, as they say. And I thought, well, I'm already moving on with my life, but it's, obviously I'm the most curious, great-grandson in the world. I'm the only one left that's around to write it, because the family still is very small. There's not that many descendants of John Frank. And, but she said, if I'm going to do something with it, wait till after she passes, and do justice to it, the story. In other words, tell the truth on both sides. No embellishment. And so in some ways, that's why you see a nonfiction book. That was something that's very, very important to me. This could be a great fictional book where we can embellish, but we really don't need to embellish, because there were so many true, colorful characters in this story.
A movie.
And,
I could see it definitely as a movie too.
Absolutely, or as a serial, because honestly, as Vicki and I both know, we were a bit disappointed. This book could have been a lot larger, but it may have been, unreadable at that point, because you don't want to wear people out. John Frank had many other criminal cases, and we were lucky enough to be able to mention a few of the other ones in there. Of course, the Black Hand one is the most famous, but he had many other cases in his career, and some of them are just wonderfully interesting.
So
let me hold off on that question and let you go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, there's another question was asked that with the postal inspectors, you don't hear much about them being, detectives or police. This was very new to some people. So do they still do that? Is this something that was normal, that they did, police work at that time? Do they still do that type of thing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They are a very, very robust force of detectives, and they are still the silent service, so they're still like under the radar. But when you're talking about the Unabomber or anthrax, all of these cases and many, many more, and cases of trafficking, anytime you use the U.S. mail, it's the post office inspectors that have jurisdiction. And a lot of times what happens is that case is also worked the FBI, and the FBI has always been like 100% about self-promotion. Right. So that's why, here we have this great force of really, really brilliant investigators that no one's ever heard of. And I was one of those people.
Yeah, exactly. Now you did say that, Hammy, you researched for 13 years and then approached Victoria. Was that your first in that bar? Was that the first time you two met, or had you met before? And also, after you got all the information, Victoria, how long did it take you for your research and the writing process of the book?
First of all, it was a coffee shop, not a bar, Debbie.
Oh, sorry.
You know, Vicki, I was going to stand up for both of us there as well. You know,
It was new.
Sorry, my mistake. My mistake.
I to be honest with you, I kept going in circles about writing the first, I was writing outlines, first chapters, that kind of stuff. Thank goodness I didn't waste my time showing a lot of that stuff to Vicki. But, and I'd talk to other writers. I'd talk to some agents, bought books on creating that, that storyline. And, and I'd even talked to a couple different writers that wanted to see if they wanted to co-write it with me. And you get to a point where you finally just put it away. So what happened was I put it away for a little while, for about 18 months. And there's a little bar a little coffee shop called Zoo Coffee, Z-U with an umlaut, and in Annapolis, which unfortunately has been driven out of business by a national chain, which shall remain unmentioned, that built their store across the street. So the local coffee shop, that one is now gone. But Vicki was in there. I went in there one day, and a little company of my own that I was doing, sustainable consulting and whatnot. So I was going to go in there, and I would sit there and use my laptop, whatever. And I saw all these notes around her, and the way she was typing away, I thought, okay, she's not writing. It doesn't look like she's working on a corporate report. It's hard to describe it. Sometimes you can just feel it. I thought, oh my gosh, you know what? The worst she could say is no. That's because I've been said no to so many times already by so many other agents and other people out there that I thought, you know what? I have nothing to lose. And it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, to be honest with you.
Well, the question was like, so he had 13 years. So he ran away from me for 3 years.
I did not.
3 years. And then when I got a hold of him, he comes over with this enormous, Tupperware bus tub thing full, and then, says, here's the white gloves. And he didn't really leave much of these were all copies that he had made. But then I think from that time, it took about another year to put the story together. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that all your papers that you have collected and your family has over all these years and the research of all that, is that going to be just kept in the family, or would you, donate it to, is there a postal museum or the Smithsonian or something to that effect?
There's been a number of conversations. It's literally thousands of pieces of paper. I mean, I'm literally right now folding them all back up because I thought the video was going to work. So I'm trying to put them all, not all of them, but many of them away. And I normally keep them in two large safe, the largest you can get, the largest safety deposit boxes you can get in a bank here in Annapolis, to make sure that there's no fire hazard. I'm not really afraid of theft. I'm more afraid of fire. But the Smithsonian American History Museum had because the post office had so much to do with the founding of the United States, which, spoiler alert, you'll find out in the first chapter of the book about the American Revolution and the post office and the first postal inspector. But what happened is that all this material, the Smithsonian National Postal Museum was created for this sort of material from the American History Museum. It got so big they had to create their own museum. So they did that in 1993, and it's right there at First and Massachusetts Avenue, right next to Union Station in the old Washington, D.C. post office. Okay. And it is just an amazing facility, including a brew pub in the front if you decide you want to imbibe before you go in and look at all the cool postal stuff. So they have been cajoling me to possibly donate it. And the other people who've been cajoling me are the Mob Museum in Las Vegas, which is the Museum of Organized Crime and Law Enforcement in the old 1933 post office and federal courthouse in the Fremont district of Las Vegas. And Vicki and I were able to go there. They were wonderful to host us, so we had a wonderful presentation there and a wonderful time. but they're asking for a permanent component of the materials as well to put in there, mainly related to John Frank, because there's a law enforcement section that they're trying to build of famous law enforcement officers that created or changed a lot of how law enforcement, they were groundbreaking throughout the history of law enforcement in the United States.
That's an awesome.
So that's what's going on right now.
If you ever have the misfortune of having to go to Las Vegas, sorry. No, that museum is awesome. Fantastic.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it has a speakeasy in the basement too, where you can
fun.
drinks with moonshine.
And if you have a great day or the right day, Meyer Lansky, the actual Meyer Lansky you're thinking of, the gangster, his grandson is one of the proctors for the museum, and he will come by now and then and guide you around the museum if you like.
Interesting.
On this Smithsonian National Postal Museum, Ham and Victoria shared this story with them, and this is amazing to me. They were unaware of this at the Postal Museum. This whole story.
Wow, that's very interesting. Have you ever thought about actually doing a Google map that you talked about and posting it somewhere so people who were in the area in Cleveland or could go and do it?
I would love to. It's kind of one of those on your list things.
Yeah.
The reason is that it's my scrabbly notes, it would take a lot of work.
Right.
The cool thing about Google Maps is you can put a little icon on things, and then you can add notes to it. I think it would be a phenomenal thing. I think everyone should have it because
it's on your bucket list. Get it done, right?
Yeah, I mean, every time I do want to go to Brooklyn and see. There's a house in Brooklyn, and one of the guys that hired Frank DeMaio. Yeah, so I think I haven't done it. It's still in my Google.
And how about, we'll end it on this one, is you had mentioned that you're collaborating on a future project possibly. Can you give us any, have you come up with anything? Are you already working on something? What are you both doing right now?
Okay, that was a offer that I hadn't talked to Vicki about yet.
I was wondering about this. This is just
okay. Well, I have some ideas. I have some ideas on some of the other cases of John Frank Oldfield, serializing them into more of an anthology than another novel.
Okay.
Because the stories are so fun, including teaser, which Vicki was very upset about. This one, Ear in a Jar. We'll just use that as a teaser. That was one chapter that Vicki, our editor, said, well, we just don't have room for that, and I think Vicki was horribly torn, and so was I, because it was absolutely hysterical.
Oh.
But that's something I wanted to talk to Vicki about, so hopefully that's available. Now, Vicki is I can tell you, probably a million projects that she's working on because she has no idea how to stand still.
As for Inspector Oldfield, I actually have a friend in Hollywood, a producer who gave it to his producer friend, and who is looking at it for the idea of serializing it, because it would make a great.
It would be binge worthy,
It really would. I mean, and Frank, what a character for somebody to play.
Right.
How fun, and the mafiosos too.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you both very much for being here with us tonight. Ted, thank you as always for a wonderful interview, and we really appreciate it. Everybody, A Likely Story, we have it in stock. You're welcome to come down, order online, or come in person. We are open. Carroll County Public Library also has it in stock. You can call. They're open for curbside pickup, so you can call and reserve your copy as well. Join us again. We're going to be here again on Wednesday with Jennifer Steele. Hope you can join us. Good night and thank you.